When Princess Diana died in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel on August 31st, 1997, the world did not just grieve, it convulsed. Within hours, flowers began appearing outside Buckingham Palace, not dozens, not hundreds. By the end of the week, millions of bouquets stretched across the iron gates, a sea of cellophane and grief so vast that the palace grounds had to hire teams just to manage it. Across 55 countries, an estimated 2.5 billion people watched her funeral. It remains one of the most watched television events in human history. And that was just Diana. There is something about the death of a celebrity, someone we have never met, someone who has never spoken our name, that reaches inside us and pulls something loose. This phenomenon, what psychologists call parasocial grief, makes us mourn them like family. We argue about their legacies like they owe us answers, and in the aftermath, things change. Laws, music, the way we talk about grief and mental health, and what it means to be famous in this world. This is the story of how celebrity deaths reshape culture, rewrite laws, transform music, and redefine what it means to be famous. This is the story of what happens when icons fall and why the world is never quite the same after. Diana, the death that changed the monarchy. Before Diana, the British royal family operated behind a wall of institutional silence. They did not explain themselves. They did not apologize. They did not grieve publicly because grief was considered private, and private was the only mode they knew. Diana broke that wall while she was alive. Her death shattered whatever remained of it. When the news broke that she had died in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, Queen Elizabeth II and the royal family were at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. They stayed, they kept their composure, and for 4 days they said almost nothing. The British public, watching flowers pile up at the gates of royal residences across the country, was furious. Tabloid headlines screamed, phone-ins lit up. The pressure became so intense that the Queen, a woman who had ruled for 45 years without ever really bowing to public sentiment, was forced to return to London, address the nation on live television, and lower the flag over Buckingham Palace to half-mast, something that had never been done in the history of the monarchy. That broadcast, delivered in measured but unmistakably personal tones, marked a turning point. The monarchy began to slowly, reluctantly, learn the language of emotional transparency. The institution that Diana had accused of being cold and uncaring began, in the decades after her death, to engage more directly with the public, to appear at charity events, not as distant figureheads, but as participants. It wasn't enough for everyone. It never is. But the change was real. Diana's death didn't just expose a fault line in the British establishment, it forced that establishment to move. Michael Jackson, the reinvention of legacy. When Michael Jackson died on June 25, 2009, the internet broke. Twitter went down. Google thought it was under a denial of service attack because the search traffic for Michael Jackson was so massive, the servers could not handle it. Wikipedia's editors scrambled to keep up with the edits flooding his page in real time. But here's what's fascinating about Michael Jackson's death. It didn't just create a surge of grief, it actively rewrote the narrative of his final years. Jackson had spent the last decade of his life in a kind of cultural exile. The 2005 child molestation trial, though it ended in acquittal, had left him radioactive to much of the mainstream music industry. Radio stations were not playing his music the way they once had. The jokes were cruel and constant. Then, he died. Within days, the conversation shifted. Radio stations began playing Thriller, Off the Wall, and Beat It. The album Thriller alone saw a 5.0% increase in sales. Songs that had not been given proper airplay in years were suddenly everywhere. His album sales surged to numbers that would have been inconceivable the day before his death. The estate of Michael Jackson would go on to generate hundreds of millions of dollars in the years that followed, making him, by some measures, the highest-earning dead celebrity in the world. What his death revealed is something uncomfortable about the way we treat fame. We often do not fully appreciate what we have until it is gone. And once it is gone, the inconvenient parts of the story tend to get quieter, at least for a while. That dynamic, death as reputation reset, is not unique to Jackson, but rarely has it played out on such a global scale. Whitney Houston, the conversation about addiction. Whitney Houston was found submerged in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton Hotel on February 11, 2012. The cause of death was accidental drowning, with atherosclerotic heart disease and cocaine use as contributing factors. She was 48 years old. In the years before her death, Whitney's struggle with drug addiction had become a public spectacle. Tabloids ran photos. Interviews aired where the descent was painfully visible. The public watched, fascinated and horrified in equal measure, as one of the most gifted voices in the history of recorded music slowly came apart. And then she died. What happened next was instructive. The conversation that followed wasn't just about Whitney. It was about the failure of the people and systems around her. It was about the entertainment industry's habit of enabling and profiting from the self-destruction of its biggest stars, and then standing at the microphone weeping when they're gone. Clive Davis, the legendary music executive who remained one of her closest professional relationships, held his annual Grammy party the night her body was still in the hotel room above. The backlash was fierce, and it sparked something lasting, a more honest public conversation about addiction as a disease rather than a moral failing. It put focus on the specific vulnerability of people who achieve enormous fame at a young age, surrounded by enablers with no real infrastructure of care. It didn't fix the industry. These things never fix the industry all at once. But Whitney's death contributed to a slow, painful, ongoing shift in how the public discusses addiction, one where empathy has begun, at least partially, to replace judgment. Kobe Bryant, grief, legacy, and the complexity of heroes. On January 26, 2020, a helicopter carrying Kobe Bryant, his 13-year-old daughter Gianna, and 7 others went down in the hills above Calabasas, California. There were no survivors. Gianna, known as Gigi to those who knew her, had inherited her father's passion for basketball and dreamed of playing at the University of Connecticut. She was going to carry on the Bryant basketball legacy. The grief that followed was immediate and global. Murals appeared overnight in Los Angeles. Vigils were held in cities that had never had a direct connection to Kobe Bryant. NBA games were postponed. At the Staples Center, where Kobe had played for 2 decades, fans created an impromptu memorial that stretched for blocks. The sports world seemed to stop breathing. But Kobe's death also forced something harder, a reckoning with the complexity of heroism. In 2003, he was accused of sexual assault by a woman in Colorado. The criminal case was eventually dropped after the accuser declined to testify. A civil case was settled out of court. In the years that followed, Kobe had rebuilt his public image with remarkable deliberateness through an Academy Award-winning short film, through his advocacy for women's basketball, and through the visible, tender relationship he had with Gianna, who shared his love of the game. When he died, the grief was real. And so was the conversation about whether public mourning could coexist with an honest acknowledgement of the totality of a person's life. It was not a comfortable conversation. It never is when it involves someone beloved, but it was necessary. And the fact that it happened publicly, loudly, and without easy resolution was itself a kind of cultural progress. We are slowly learning to hold complexity, to say this person brought joy and left pain and both things are true, and we are allowed to sit in that tension without resolving it. Kobe's death did not create that conversation, but it amplified it in ways that nothing else could have. The pattern beneath the grief: Diana, Michael, Whitney, Kobe, and so many others. Amy Winehouse, who joined the infamous 27 Club alongside Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison. Morrison's death at 27 became a turning point in how the British music industry approached artist welfare. Heath Ledger, whose final performance as the Joker was later reframed through the lens of what it cost him. Avicii, whose death by suicide at 28 sparked an industry-wide reckoning with the mental health of touring musicians. What unites these stories is not just the grief, It is what the grief reveals. Every time a celebrity dies tragically, they become a kind of mirror, reflecting back to us the values, the failures, and the fault lines of the culture that produced them. Diana showed us the gap between institutional power and human emotion. Jackson showed us how fragile public judgment really is, how quickly the narrative can shift. Whitney showed us what happens when we treat addiction as entertainment. Kobe showed us that we can mourn someone and still ask hard questions. The deaths of famous people shape history, not because these individuals were more important than the millions of ordinary people who die every day. They shape history because of the unique position they occupy in our collective imagination, because we have, in some sense, invited them into our lives, and when they leave, the absence is felt in the same communal space where the presence once lived. Celebrity death is, in this way, a form of shared experience in a world that has fewer and fewer of them. We don't agree on much anymore. We don't watch the same shows or read the same newspapers or believe the same things. But when someone truly iconic dies, we are all in the same room for a moment, feeling the same thing. And in that room, things can change. In 1997, a journalist asked a young woman standing outside Buckingham Palace. She was surrounded by thousands of bouquets and had been waiting in line for hours to sign a condolence book for someone she had never met. The journalist asked why she was there. She thought about it for a moment. Then she said, "Because it matters. And if I don't come, who will?" That is the thing about the deaths that shake the world. They remind us, even in loss, even in grief, even in the complicated mess of mourning a person we only knew through a screen, that it matters. The stories we tell about who we lose say something profound about who we are. The question is not whether celebrity deaths shape history. They clearly do. The question is whether we are paying attention to what they are trying to tell us. If you've made it this far, thank you. I'll see you in the next case.